All right, welcome to this special presentation of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I'm Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, I said special presentation, and I said that for a reason, because Monday night, we had our presenter in for our usual meeting, and there were some technical difficulties that, frankly, we couldn't quite overcome. So our presenter tonight agreed to do this for us so we could get his talk out there on YouTube. And I'm really thankful he did it. So let's just get right into it. The shooting of Chicago Cubs shortstop Billy Jurges is one of the most famous stories in baseball history. According to the Chicago Daily Tribune, Jurges had been playing brilliantly for the Cubs prior to the day that Violet Popovich, a cabaret girl, shot him in the left hand and in the ribs. He was, she said, 1 in 100,000. I met him at a party and I fell hard. They dated occasionally, but after he broke off the relationship, she confronted him at his Chicago hotel. When she pulled a small caliber pistol out of her purse, they struggled and the gun went off, wounding him. She was arrested and charged with attempted murder, but Billy refused to sign the complaint. Violet, however, signed a singing contract with a local burlesque theater, billing herself as the girl who shot for love. SABR member Jack Bales retired in 2020 after more than 40 years at the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Although a librarian by vocation, he is a writer by avocation and has published numerous works for books, journals, magazines, literary encyclopedias, and newspapers. Not to mention being one of my favorite SABR raconteurs. And he's back tonight with his new presentation, No Shrinking Violet. Violet Popovich and the Chicago Cubs Shot for Love. Jack Bales, welcome back for a third time. Here we go.
And thank you very much, Bruce and Molly, for having me back here. And I look forward to this, and I think all our problems have been ironed out, and I hope people really enjoy it because this is a great story, I think.
Let's go. Pop it on and let's get started.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here.
You bet.
And okay, and here we go. All right.
It's all yours, Jack.
Okay, hello everybody. I appreciate being here and talking about what I think is not only a fascinating baseball story about the 1932 Chicago Cubs, but it's also a really terrific tale of true crime intrigue and topped off with dozens of contemporary photographs, including some never before published. Let's start out with September 20th, 1932. The Cubs had just clinched the National League pennant with a record of 90 wins and 64 losses and 4 games in front of the second-place Pittsburgh Pirates, with whom they had been battling most of the season. And the Chicago Daily Tribune was really rather stunned by this accomplishment, as the Cubs had had to deal with quite a few really major setbacks. Early on, it was thought they needed some help in the pitching department, but Lon Warnke, who had been a rookie in 1931, won 22 games, that year and lost just 6. He had a 2.37 ERA. The mighty slugger Hack Wilson had been traded, but Johnny Moore stepped up and hit 305 that year. And the Tribune reported, in fact, in this article shown here, that, quote, never before was a team beset with more irritating experiences apart from the playing of baseball. There was the obvious bad blood between between the Cubs president, William Beck, father of Bill Beck, and the team's talented but thoroughly disagreeable manager, Rogers Hornsby. Now, the Sporting News points out, as you can see here, that the Cubs season provided them with, quote, a succession of varied thrills. And tops on the list of both the Tribune and the Sporting News was the July 6th shooting of their star shortstop, Billy Jurges, in, as the Sporting News points out here, an episode of unrequited love. I love these two papers here. And the sensational shooting of a popular baseball player by his former lover, and I guess spurned lover, Violet Popovich, immediately captured the public's attention, as you think it might. And everyone wanted to know exactly what did happen in room 509 of Chicago's Hotel Carlos. And just a few hours after reporters first heard the news, Chicago's Daily Illustrated Times was on the newsstands with a banner headline, as was the Chicago Daily News. And in the Daily Illustrated Times article, I only have part of the headline in there. I couldn't get the other part, but the full thing says, Bill Jurges shot by spurned cabaret girl. And note the subtitle at the far right of the Daily News article, Girl Wounded in Hotel Mystery, Both Will Live. The Associated Press carried the news around the country, reporting that, quote, a woman scorned almost took the life of Bill Jurges, star shortstop of the Chicago National Baseball Club. So wow, it was all over the news here. And the thing is, I've got quite a few baseball histories in general and Cubs books in particular, and the shooting incident appears here and there, but not really in much detail at all. And the authors provided just a few cursory comments, and that's all. And I felt that the story made the Cubs season particularly intriguing. I set out to find, more information about what really happened in Jurges's hotel room. And information about Billy's life was way out there. A lot of baseball sources, a lot of baseball websites. But what about Violet's background? What about her childhood? What about her family? What did she do with her life after the excitement died down and newspapers moved on to other stories? And of course, what happened with the Cubs' 1932 season, the season made really popular naturally by Babe Ruth and the famous called shot. Arguably, maybe not even arguably, maybe unarguably the most famous home run in baseball history. And slowly the details began to emerge. For example, the Chicago History Museum used to be called the Chicago Historical Society. It's right near my hometown of Aurora, Illinois. It had the records of the orphanage where Violet and her brother stayed for a few years. I found some invaluable information, not only about them, but also about their father. Her father really provided, very little emotional support, very little monetary support. In fact, I came across a letter that said the father from the orphanage administrator saying that the father wanted to take one of the boys home with him, and the boy said no. He said the orphanage was the only real home he had ever had his whole life, that he remembered anyway, and he'd rather be at the orphanage than with his father. Talk about a kick to the teeth here. In newspaper articles, lots and lots of newspaper articles. Some I found on newspapers.com. Other ones, like the Chicago Herald and Examiner, wasn't available online, but I'd go through them page by page by page. Chicago Daily News was another one I went through page by page. They gave great day-by-day coverage, some great interviews with Violet, and also some of the other people involved in this, like comments by the ball players who came to Billy's aid in his hotel room. Chicago court records were invaluable. I had a Chicago researcher help me with those because they were a little bit of, I did not know the court system very well, and they were kind of hidden away. Anyway, Violet's father was physically abusive to his wife. There was a long, drawn-out divorce hearing. Even 8-year-old Violet had to testify. I was able to interview both Billy's family members, his daughter and his grandson, and also 2 of Violet's nephews. And they answered quite a few questions. So today, here's an outline of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the shooting of Billy by his former girlfriend, her court hearing, and a few more details about Violet's life, including her really early unhappy years. Going to talk about the 1932 Cubs, talk about Billy Jurges, and along the way, I'm going to show quite a few photographs before I sum everything up with their last years. Now, on July 1, 1932, the Cubs were in first place in the National League, and they were in the really middle of a really tight pennant race. And a player who was contributing a lot to his success was 24-year-old shortstop Billy Jurges. But now, 21-year-old Violet Popovich, her stage name was Violet Valley, by the way, would soon put a stop to this just a few days later. Now, Billy and a few other Cubs players were staying at the Hotel Carlos, just a couple of blocks north of Wrigley Field on Sheffield Avenue. It's still standing there today. And the morning of July 6th, 1932, Billy was getting ready for a game in the afternoon with the Philadelphia Phillies. The Cubs were in third place, 3 games behind the Pirates. And about 9:45, Violet called him from her room. She was staying there at room 111 and said she wanted to see him. He told her to come on up. And about 10:15, she knocked on the door, room 509. The arrow there points to his room. It faces the front of Sheffield Street. They'd been going out for about a year, but he had recently called things off. He said he wanted to concentrate more on baseball. He said they had a chance at the pennant. He wanted to knuckle down and play baseball. Also, he even admitted that, he wanted to kind of play the field a little bit. No pun intended, I guess. He was young, he was single, he was in a neat city, Chicago. He wanted to see other people. They had a big argument before this day, and they proceeded to have a big argument in his hotel room. She wanted to talk about it all. They ended up arguing some more, and she asked him for a glass of water. So he left the room to get it. And I'd like to say this is kind of a bad move on Billy's part. While he was getting out, she pulled out a small caliber revolver from her purse. The New York Times wrote that he made a wild lunge for the gun. And in the ensuing struggle, just like they say in the movies, 3 shots rang out. Okay, 1 bullet struck him in the right side and bam, ricocheted off a rib and went up his right shoulder. Another grazed a little finger of his left hand. A third bullet struck Violet at about the base of her thumb and went up her arm about 6 inches. As luck would have it, the Cubs team physician happened to be in the hotel at that time. The Cubs ball players heard the shots. They helped Billy, called the team doctor, and both of them were treated there and were taken to a nearby hospital. The Chicago newspapers naturally pounced on this story, and as they say nowadays, it went viral. And by the way, all these photographs are original wire photos I have from my own personal collection. It was also somewhat sensational, and I started collecting all the different ways people described Violet. Reporters and sports writers described Violet. She was the dark-haired former chorus girl. She was the pretty gun-toter. The 21-year-old comely brunette, and the raven-tressed beauty. Photographers even barged into her hospital room to take pictures. Violet dislikes cameras was a headline for this photograph appearing in Chicago's papers, and with a note beneath it that said, quote, Bill Jurges, whom she plugged, was in another room, unquote. And note her bandaged left arm here. Now, she stayed in the Illinois Masonic Hospital, that's where Billy was too, for a couple of days, and here she is leaving for the Bridewell Hospital, which is right next to the Cook County Jail. That's a prison matron leading the way there. She was booked on a charge of assault with intent to kill, and note that her left arm is still pretty much bandaged up. In the meantime, naturally, the police searched her hotel room. They found these 2 photographs there. They also found a note addressed to her brother in which she said, quote, to me, life without Billy isn't worth leaving, but why should I leave this world alone? Why should I leave this earth alone? I'm going to take Billy with me. Wow. She later, though, backpedaled the whole thing, said that the letter was the result of too much gin and that she only wanted to kill herself to make Billy sorry for breaking up with her. She said in an interview that when Billy was out of the room getting her a glass of water, she said, quote, I pulled out my revolver, intending to kill myself. Bill saw me and grabbed the gun. We fought for it. We really fought for it. The gun kept exploding. I didn't want to hurt him, unquote. Now, Violet made the newspapers almost daily, particularly on July 15th, the day of her arraignment. And the Chicago American said that when she entered the courtroom with her attorneys, The crowd gasped at her radiant beauty. The Daily Illustrated Times wrote that she was a symphony in red and white, with her red earrings, her red shoes, her red striped trimmings on her white crepe sports dress exactly matching her shade of lipstick. I love this photograph. This is the only known photograph of her standing, during all this mess. A newspaper reporter in Chicago gave me the original negative. He knew of my interest and he contacted me and said, "Hey, we have a Violet Popovich folder here. Do you want what's in it?" I said, "Sure." And he sent me this whole folder, including the original negative, one of those big, 3 by 3 inch negatives with a brown envelope. It was never published at that time, never, at least not in any of the Chicago papers. And I checked and checked. Those are her two attorneys there. The judge, John Sabarbaro, he was not only an attorney and a judge, but he was also the ultimate political fixer. This is according to an Al Capone biography who commented on him a great deal. He ran a mortuary favored by Chicago's mobsters. He used his garage to hide bootleg liquor, kind of a drop-off spot for bootleg liquor. But he was also a Cubs fan. And he, like Billy and like the Cubs, just wanted all this to just go quietly away. So Billy refused to press charges, and the judge dismissed the case. I love this photograph too. There's Violet glancing at her attorney, one of her attorneys, with this demure look on her face. Billy is not blowing his nose. He's hiding his face from the photographers. The courtroom is packed, as you can see. There's some of Violet's showgirl friends in the audience there, some of Billy's ball player friends too. And in my book, I discuss the whole court hearing and what went on. And this was on July 15th. On July 22nd, Billy was shot 3 times, but on July 22nd, he felt well enough to take the field in a game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played third base. There'd be less stretching to do than he would at shortstop. The Cubs lost 3-1, but as one newspaper reported, quote, Billy Jurges, the celebrated revolver target, bowed himself back into his profession by socking a single to center. It never lets up with Violet. Okay, you can't make this stuff up, as they say. Now Billy refused to sign a complaint against Violet, but that didn't stop her. She signed a contract. She wanted to capitalize on her newfound fame, so she wanted to perform as a singer under her stage name, Violet Ballet, billing herself as the girl who shot for love in the Bear Cub Follies. And the State Congress Theater was in kind of a seedy neighborhood on the South State Street, a seedy area known for its, rooming houses, hotels, burlesque parlors, pool halls, etc. And interestingly enough, on the same day that newspapers reported on Billy's return to the baseball field, Violet returned to the stage as a singer here in the Bear Cub Follies. And management did its part to attract an audience by booking some, again, you can't make this stuff up, some Bear Cub girls, B-A-R-E, I might add, as her opening act. I love this ad, and I found this by going through the Chicago Record and Examiner page by page. It talks about the Bear Cub Frolics, but it really was called the Bear Cub Follies, I think. And I found a detailed review of what all went on in her show in the Chicago Daily News. In fact, I went through all these Chicago papers, and that was uppermost in my mind. What really went on in this show, and is there a review of it? And I found a rather long one, as a matter of fact. And the reviewer pointed out that the degree of nudity depended upon the applause each Bear Cub girl got. The more clothes it got, the more applause, the greater the applause, the more removal of the clothes. And the reviewer was this fascinating guy named Lloyd Lewis. I'd never heard of him before, but he's written a well-respected book on the Civil War. He was a well-respected editor of the Times. He hobnobbed with all the leading politicians and reporters and big names of the day. Frank Lloyd Wright was his pal. Frank Lloyd Wright designed his house, which is now an Illinois State monument, or it's on the Illinois State historical list. Anyway, Lewis said that after there was an hour-long session of the Bear Cub Girls, and she went on stage and sang a rather popular song of the day, as he pointed out. He said, quote, "It was a good job, not great, but good." And after she ended the song, he wrote that the patrons kind of expected her to, start taking off her clothes too, but she did not. He wrote, quote, "She merely walks off, bowing. There are a few scattering hand claps. She takes another bow. Then she walks off the stage without a single gesture of salaciousness." Now, Violet's nephew, whom I interviewed, I think 3 or 4 extensive times, told me that her singing career never really took off, and that her lack of success, he said, may have stemmed from her lack of talent. She liked to sing, he told me. That is, she tried to sing. Good old Violet, she never catches a break. She's back in the news again, back in John Sabarbaro's courtroom. Her bail bondsman, part-time real estate man, a full-time con man, full-time hustler. He stole her Billy Jurges love letters. He said he wanted to publish them under the title Love Letters of a Shortstop. He said he wanted to sell them in ballparks all across the country. And the judge thought this was fish. Who would want to buy a bunch of letters? But anyway, what he really wanted to do, he wanted to blackmail Billy to the tune of $25,000. His scheme didn't work. The judge and policeman got the letters back. And after that happened, she was soon back on the stage. She was singing sentimental torch songs at this Kitty Davis cocktail lounge in Chicago. She was also seeing Fred Williams, shown here, who worked at his father's hardware factory, I should say. They applied for a marriage license. They never married, though. By 1940, Violet and her mother had moved from Chicago, and they were living in Los Angeles. Mark Prescott, the son of her brother, Mark, learned of my research, and he contacted me, and he offered family photographs, personal insights, and with some more research, I eventually found out more and more about Violet's early life and about a really strange, sad saga of her life. All she wanted was someone to take care of her. She had a bad home life, and she was hoping she'd find that with Billy, but it just didn't work out. By the way, this is my favorite photograph of all those early ones. She looks so, she has her whole life in front of her, and she looks kind of sweet. And, little did she know that she'd be arrested later on. Okay. Violet's father was a man named Mirko Popovich. He was an Austrian immigrant. He arrived at Ellis Island in 1907. He was an electrician by trade. He moved to Chicago in 1910. He married Margaret Heindel, who was also from Austria. They had 4 children, of which Violet was the oldest. The marriage was not at all a happy one. Violet was only 10 days old, and Mirko started beating his wife, gave her black and blue eyes. The couple got divorced in 1920 on the grounds of extreme and repeated cruelty. In fact, 8-year-old Violet had to even testify at the divorce hearing. Child support was very slow in coming. I mentioned the Ulick orphanage. That's why they had to stay there, because she couldn't afford to keep the children, run by the Lutheran Church. Violet disliked living at the orphanage, and in 1926, shortly before her 15th birthday, she ran away from home. Oh, well, excuse me, she told the administrator she was 18 and she wanted to live with her mother. But apparently no one verified her age. They just let her go, and she returned to her mother. A few months later, she probably regretted that decision, because she stayed out late with a boy. They went to a movie, stayed out late, and her mother punished her, whipped her, I guess, according to the headline here. And the police were called to find her, and Violet consequently made her first appearance in the Chicago Daily Tribune. She said in the interviews that she was married at a young age, but it was a very short marriage. I was unhappily married at age 18. She said, one of those puppy love affairs with a schoolboy. I never lived with him. We were divorced, and we were divorced 6 months later. Right after her divorce, she enrolled at a dancing school, and in early 1930, she joined the chorus of a Chicago production of Vanities, which was a big production across the country put out by a man named Earl Carroll of New York City. He was very famous for his elaborate shows as scantily clad showgirls. And the souvenir pamphlet here notes that the show was America's greatest review, and his motto was, I think it's engraved on his place in New York, or maybe it was Los Angeles, through these portals pass the most beautiful girls in the world. Now, in the summer of 1931, she was in Vanities, and in 1930, then in 31, she met Billy, and she said in an interview that, quote, "Bill is the boy and 100,000 for me. I met him at a party, and if it wasn't love at first sight, it was just about second." A year later, the two of them had their dramatic confrontation at the Hotel Carlos. She sang in the burlesque show, she sang in nightclubs, and she eventually moved to Los Angeles. We'll continue with Violet, but let's get back to Billy and the Cubs for a bit. Here are the team's infielders. That's Woody English. He played shortstop and third base. Next is Billy Herman, a Hall of Famer, second baseman. Charlie Grimm was the club captain and first base. That's Stan Hack on fourth. They called him Smiling Stan for obvious reason. He played third base, and Billy Jurges was their star shortstop at the far right there. Now, Beck believed that the team was easily good enough to win the National League pennant. He was getting pretty darn sick and tired of manager Rogers Hornsby's constant complaining about the team and their their alleged shortcomings. And the players too had little use for Hornsby. Billy Herman said in an interview that he was one of the greatest hitters that ever lived, perhaps the greatest, but he never talked hitting with us. He just expected you to go up there and do it. Things continued to get worse. A loss to the Brooklyn Dodgers on August 2nd put the Cubs five games behind the Pittsburgh Pirates in first place. And that evening, Beck said, "The heck with this." He fired Hornsby and appointed as manager the popular first baseman and club captain Charlie Grimm, also known as the left-handed banjo player. Now, Grimm lived up to his nickname, which was Jolly Charlie, and the team flourished under his really easygoing management style. No rules, no curfew. He controlled everything on the field, but off the field, he let everybody have their own way. Now, club president William Beck, of course, was concerned about Billy's recovery right after the shooting, and then there's also the loss of Rogers Hornsby. So Beck brought in infielder Mark Koenig to help out as shortstop. He used to play with the Yankees, and he proved to be an excellent choice as he helped the Cubs clinch the National League pennant on September 20th. But all, it was a tough game, a tough season for the Cubs. It was just one thing after another, said the Chicago Tribune. Including the well-publicized dismissal of Rogers Hornsby, the shooting of Billy Jurges, and there were even some totally unfounded charges by the Chicago Daily News of horse race gambling among the players, which was completely not true. And William Beck was just outraged, wrote a letter to the paper. They brought in Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He had to investigate. And finally, it was agreed that it was just simply not true at all. But through it all, the Cubs managed to prevail, due in large part to the hitting and fielding of Mark Koenig, who batted .353 during the 33 games he played for the Cubs from August 14th to the end of the season, September 25. Now, each team would get a share of the World Series gate receipts, and the players got to vote on how much each player received, and it had to be unanimous. And two Cubs players, back then it was anonymous, but I found out later in some interviews that it was Billy Herman and Billy Jurges who voted that Mark Koenig should only get a half share because he didn't play in as many games as the others. In fact, there were 154 games. Koenig played in 33 of them, or about 21%, and Billy was in 115 of them, about 75%. But the New York Yankees, Kennick's former team, Chicago's World Series opponents, they did not see it that way. When the newspapers announced the World Series cut, they really just got on the Cubs right and left, calling them cheapskates, calling them penny pinchers, Babe Ruth especially. He said, "I hope we beat them in 4 straight." They gave their they gave Kennick a sour deal in his player cut. They're chiselers, and I tell them so. Now, as famed Washington Post sports writer Shirley Povich said, quote, "The Cubs' stinginess inspired the Yankees to new heights." Now, the Cubs were down 2-0 in the World Series when Game 3 was played in Chicago. And in the 5th inning, the score is tied 4-4. Ruth was at the plate facing pitcher Charlie Root. The count was at 2 balls and 2 strikes, and Babe Ruth, as you can see here, raised 2 fingers of his right hand. Now, did he gesture contemptuously to the Cubs in the third base dugout? Did he gesture to Charlie Root? Did he point to center field as if he were to signal that that's where he was going to hit his home run? That is, did he, as everybody knows, did he call his shot? Or did he indicate that that was 2 strikes? There are all these different scenarios. But what person saw, depending upon where they were sitting and the angle of the view, and even the home movies shown during this time really can't make a pinpoint what really happened. In fact, Robert Kramer, in his biography, a big biography of Babe Ruth, said the very same thing. In any case, Babe Ruth did indeed hit a home run. Lou Gehrig, few people know that Lou Gehrig followed that with a home run of his own. And the Cubs lost that game 7-5. They lost the next game too. The thoroughly demoralized Cubs lost the World Series in 4 games straight, just as Babe Ruth had hoped. They didn't even win 1 game. Now, of course, whether or not Babe Ruth called his shot has been debated ever since October 1, 1932. And I go into this in some detail in my book. And by the way, what really surprised me is that the opinions about whether he did or did not point do not fall at all along partisan lines. I found Cubs, including pitcher Guy Bush, who was probably Ruth's main heckler at the time before the game. He emphatically maintained that he absolutely did point to center field. And I also found Yankees who also rather emphatically said that he did not point, that they recognized early on that it was a good story and that they decided to keep quiet. Reporters picked up on the whole call shot thing after reporter Joe Williams of the New York World Telegram mentioned it here in his headline. According to the hard-nosed Charlie Root, he said that if Ruth had tried to show him up by signaling where he's going to hit the baseball, quote, "Anybody who knows me knows that Ruth would have ended up on his ass." And some baseball historians say they don't really know if that would really happen, because that would have put Ruth on base with Lou Gehrig up. Could you chance putting Lou Gehrig up too? But anyway, Charlie Ruth brooked no interference on the topic. He was offered a large sum of money to play himself in the movie The Babe Ruth Story, and he just said no. He said, "Not if you're going to show him pointing. I don't want to have any part in this movie." During during a Root family outing one day, everybody was playing a game of wiffle ball, and Charlie Root, of course, was the pitcher, and Charlie Jr.'s wife was up to bat, and she made the mistake of taking a wiffle ball bat and pointing to center field, and old Charlie wound up and threw it as hard as he could and hit her on the neck and knocked her to the ground. You didn't mess with Charlie Root when it came to the called shot. And it rankled him his whole life. And right before he died, he told his daughter, "I said, I gave my whole life to baseball, and in the end, I'll be remembered for something that never really happened. But, people, and this is my opinion too, what does it really matter? Only Babe Ruth is, and he had this, we all know he had this extraordinary presence on the baseball field, and only his charismatic presence could have turned this whole, just a few moments of baseball into American legend. Even Charlie Grimm, the manager of the Cubs, said, a great guy hit that homer, the greatest slugger of all time. And here's Charlie Root right here. Now, after Violet shot Billy, he remarked that, I guess I'll remain a bachelor all my life. But he soon changed his mind. Then on June 28th, 1933, in Reading, Pennsylvania, he married Mary Hewitt of nearby Birdsboro, Pennsylvania. And one sports writer wrote that she must have provided inspiration for Billy, because on that day there was a Cubs doubleheader and he had 6 hits, including a home run, and the Cubs won both games. In fact, this is an original wire photo. In fact, I interviewed Billy's grandson quite a bit. I gave him a bunch of things from my own research, including this wire photo. He was just very pleased to have it. I also discuss the rest of Billy's career in my book, including his rather disastrous 1959 and 1960 seasons as manager of the Boston Red Sox. When you become a manager, he said during an interview, you have to have a team that is coming up. All of my players were ending their careers, and there was simply not much I could do there. But he did his best, but he was still let go in June 1960 with a really disappointing major league managerial record of 59 wins and 63 losses. But he did enter baseball history because in July 1959, when infielder Pumpsie Green became the first African-American to play for the Boston Red Sox, which then integrated all of Major League Baseball. I talked to Billy's grandson quite a bit, and he said Billy became a really well-respected scout. And when Billy's grandson traveled with Billy to all these major league parks, and you could tell all the major league players really, really respected Billy and his opinions. And Billy's grandson met quite a few of these people. He helped young players learn their craft, and also he instilled in them his whole passion for the game. And 2 ball players who credited him in print for his assistance were 2 future Hall of Famers, Eddie Matthews, the third baseman for the Boston Braves, and Harmon Killebrew, who was a real slugger for the Minnesota Twins. Billy quit the baseball life in the early 1980s to help care for his sick wife, Mary. She died in 1984. Several years later, Billy remarried, and as he put it, he and his wife, Phyllis, quote, lived the good life in Lago, Florida, unquote. There's a park nearby. They'd play horseshoes. They'd play pinochle. They'd visit some nearby baseball players in the area. Phil Cavaretta, first baseman of the Chicago Cubs, was a good friend of his. They traveled together. And he really had a very good time, and he socialized with former players at baseball functions. Billy was not at all a powerful hitter, and he complained about that in interviews I read. But he compensated for that with some really, really solid defensive skills. And sometimes I think that did not endear him to the Boston Red Sox, because he would get on them, especially the shortstops. A shortstop has got to field those double plays. He was in the major leagues for 17 years, from 1931 to 1947. And for those years, 32, 35, 37, 39, he led the National League shortstops with fielding percentage. He led the National League in 1935 in completing double plays. But he batted just .258 in his 1,816 games. He got 1,613 hits. He was in the Cubs for a long time, from 1931 to 1938. Then he went with the New York Giants and back to the Cubs to finish out his career from 1946 to 1947. He had a good life, he said. He said, Cubs, Giants, good year or bad year, I have never failed to do my best to play out to the limit. Baseball has done very well by me. I have done all I could for baseball. He was diagnosed with cancer in 1991. He entered the hospital in early 1997, died a few weeks later on March 3rd at age 88. His body was cremated, his grandson told me. Wikipedia has him buried some places. No, he said he had him cremated. In fact, Billy's grandson helped scatter the ashes. Some of them at Wrigley Field. I interviewed Billy's grandson and also his daughter. And I asked, as I said, and I asked her if she knew that I kind of tried to go for a broke. I said, hey, did you know about Violet Popovich shooting your father? And she immediately said, oh, yeah. She said she was familiar with the incident quite well, very well familiar with the incident when she was growing up. But she said, quote, and I have this on tape, it was never mentioned in our house. Never, unquote. As I said, by 1940, let's go back to Violet for a bit. Violet and her mother, Margaret Heindel, had moved from Chicago. They settled in Los Angeles. Now, Violet always considered herself a singer, so when she got to LA, she had these photographs made. Uh, kind of glamour photographs. I love that cape and those shorts there. Unfortunately, despite the glamour shots, she saw few opportunities for launching a West Coast singing career. She was a city person. And both Mark and I, well, I figured this out, and Mark, her nephew, said, this is a marriage doomed to disaster. She got married in 1947 to this prize fighter named Charlie Retzlaff. He's from Duluth, Minnesota, known as the Duluth Dynamiter. He was regarded as a very good fighter until he met a young boxer in 1936 who knocked him out in the first round. Not surprising, that young boxer was Joe Louis. A year later, he'd be crowned as the world's heavyweight champion. They did not divorce, though. They remained good friends. Her nephew, Mark, told me that in 1962, the two of them spent Thanksgiving dinner at his house, his family house in Beverly Hills, where Violet cheerfully told everybody that she and Charlie had spent that afternoon sunbathing nude. And Mark recalled that, quote, that comment caused quite a stir. Charlie was very embarrassed. My father blew up, and the words went flying all at the Thanksgiving dinner table. The gregarious Violet, though, was certainly not at a loss for other male friends. She once caught the eye of motion picture star John Wayne. They met at a cocktail lounge near the Paramount studio department, where she worked at the color film department at Paramount Studios, and he drove her home. She told her nephew, who told me that he had high hopes of getting comfortable and staying a while, but those hopes were soon dashed by her mother, who was waiting up for her. Now, Violet dated baseball player Leo DeRocher in the late 1930s. He also dated Al Lopez at that time, too. Both of them became major league managers, DeRocher of the Cubs and Al Lopez of the White Sox in the 1960s. If you have friends who say they are baseball trivia experts, I've yet to know of anybody who knows the answer to this question. What former showgirl went out with two Hall of Famers who were managers of the two Chicago professional baseball teams? Violet spent her final years in a nursing home. She did not have much money, but she made up for it with her very cheerful spirits, her nephews told me. She regaled residents and staff with her stories of her showgirl past. She died on February 25th, 2000, was buried in Los Angeles' Forest Lawn Memorial Park. She was 88 when she died, the very same age as Billy. Now, I had to talk about the Hotel Carlos. I did a lot of research into the Hotel Carlos, and just like Violet, the Hotel Carlos had its share of tough times. This was what's called one of those single occupancy hotels, and it's a residential hotel that gradually fell into a state of disrepair. You can see the air conditioner on the upper left there. It looks like there's trimming that's falling apart there. To the right of the doorway, it looks like there's some epoxy or something filler holding the column together. It still has that ornate Hotel Carlos, though, engraved above the doorway. It later changed its name to the Hotel Sheffield. You can see the sign parallel to the awning there on the right, perpendicular to the hotel itself. They're called the Hotel Sheffield. A real estate company purchased it in 2011, and by 2014 it was completely remodeled and called the 3834 North Sheffield. Not very, not a very original name, I can't help but think. According to its webpage, the property was, quote, a once hip apartment hotel for Chicago Cubs players. And now was thoroughly modernized, though, and offering studio apartments for young professionals, upscale professionals, but it still kept, according to the webpage, the gorgeous vintage details that remain from a glorious and distant past. And Billy's room is, as you can still see there, on the top floor on the far right. Just two more things. In 1949, 19-year-old Chicagoan Ruth Steinhagen, who led, to quote the New York Times, a twisted fascination with former Cub and then Philadelphia Philly Eddie Waitkus, who shot him in his hotel room at Chicago's Edgewater Beach Hotel. Ironically, shot Eddie Waitkus, excuse me, Philadelphia Philly Eddie Waitkus in his hotel room. Ironically, Eddie and Billy Jurges played together at the same time for the Cubs for 2 years. In fact, Eddie, 1946 and 47, and Eddie hit a double in Billy's last game on September 9th, 1947. I can't help but think, these are both well-publicized shootings all around the country. They had to compare notes, hey, how was it with you? You got shot 3 times, I got shot once, how did it all happen? And we're all familiar with The Natural, and author Bernard Malamud never mentioned where he got his source material, but it seems likely that one or two of these shootings, the Billy Jurges shooting for the Cubs, the Eddie Waitkus shooting for the Phillies, inspired him to conclude a passage in his 1952 novel, The Natural, in which a woman shoots ball player Roy Hobbs. I can't help but think it was probably the Eddie Waitkus shooting, though. That occurred in 49. The novel was in 51. That was probably uppermost in his mind. The book and the movie continue to live on today, thanks to the 1984 motion picture starring Robert Redford as Roy Hobbs. And by the way, Ruth Steinhagen died in 2012, but her death went unnoticed for a couple of weeks before Chicago sports writers finally started commenting about it. And a lot of big articles in the papers about that time. And I did a lot of research on that too. That whole shooting rather intrigued me. I have a big psychological report that goes into it all. And in fact, I easily got her phone number, easily got her address. I wrote her 3 times, wanted to interview her. I offered to even pay her for the interview, but she never answered it, which doesn't surprise me, of course. I'm sure she had a lot of people pester her for interviews. The Eddie Waitkus biographer, I read in his book, he said he stood outside her house, thinking, should I knock on the door or not? A woman finally came out to talk to him, but he did not even know whether it was really Ruth or it could have been Ruth's sister. He didn't know who it was, and so he never really said much about her in the book. But excuse me, one more question needs to be answered. Did Violet really intend to kill Billy when she burst into his hotel room? Remember, she left a note saying that was her intention. She said, I'm going to take Billy with me. I don't want to leave this earth alone. I'm going to take Billy with me. But after the shooting, she said she only wanted to kill herself to make Billy upset for having dropped her, to show Billy how much she loved him. Well, I talked to Mark about this, her nephew, and basically Violet lied. He said that she confided to his mother, Violet's sister-in-law, that she had indeed gone to room 509 with a gun in her purse with the sole intention of killing Billy. She told his mother, who told Mark, and Mark said this was the exact sentence: "I was very angry at Billy and I wanted to kill him." I had a lot of fun researching and writing about this, and here's my book with a foreword by Tim Wiles, who was the former research director at the Hall of Fame. There's my email address here. I had specially made book plates designed featuring this image of the book. If anybody would like to buy the book, it's on eBay now from the publisher for like less than $15. I'll be happy to send an inscribed autographed book plate to you. But let me end on this something on a light note. I've enjoyed all this research a great deal. It was a lot of fun. I have a talk at a nearby retirement home coming up. All these people in this retirement home are really anxious to hear about Billy and Violet. Had a marvelous time immersing myself in newspaper articles and court records and interviewing all these family members. And some years ago, I decided to even make Violet part of my family Christmas card featuring me and my son and my daughter and Violet. So here's a Christmas card that I sent out to many people just a few years ago. And note the bandage on Violet's arm. It says, "Violet, comma, I hope you feel better soon. Go Cubs, Jack." Thanks very much, everybody.
You know, when we were trying to get through all the technical difficulties on Monday, one of the things that I was talking about with a lot of members is I can't help but think, being the theater kid that I am, that Bob Fosse and Fred Ebb knew of this story and used it as part of the basis of Chicago, the musical, right. Even though Chicago was based on a play that goes back to 1926.
26, right. Yeah.
I can't, I listened to some of the lyrics in the back of my head. He had it coming. He had it coming. Right. And I think that Fosse and Ebb had to know at least some of this story to incorporate it into the musical, even with the lyrics. They both reached for the gun,
I know, right? Yeah. Well, Bruce, I can't believe how many people have commented that to me, because I've talked about this to places around here, and I even the Brookfield, Illinois Public Library made this book of the year, and so I went there and gave a great talk. Well, I'm not sure if it was great, but I gave a talk to a great amount of people, and I had a great time talking to them. I went to a historical society in Quincy, Illinois. I talked about it there. I've done radio shows and everything, and a lot of people have commented, "Hey, this sounds like that musical." But we had a great time talking about it. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I told an interview one time, look, it's got baseball, it's got a shooting, it's got drama, it's got a spurn lover, it's got stolen love letters, you got a spurn lover, it's got sex, it's got baseball. I said, what else is there?
I mean,
it's all here.
And you wonder why I call you one of SABR's best raconteurs. This is exactly why I say that. Hey, Molly's got a couple of questions for you. Molly, go ahead.
How old were her siblings when the divorce happened?
Let's see.
She was 8.
Go back. She was 8, yeah. And let me see. I think do I cover that here? I really.
I'm sorry. Did I stump you?
Well, I should have known that. There we go. They were both younger. I know that. I'd say they were probably 5 or 6. Something like that, 4, 5, or 6, but they were way younger. I know that, yeah. Okay. But they did not said Violet handled it pretty well, but the other two did not, particularly the one, I guess, as I said, did not even want to live the orphanage because he was so young when he went there, and that was the only home he knew. And his father was just not a nice person. Mark would tell me that he just wasn't a good person.
And when it came to that divorce, Did the mom have the custody and dad was trying to bring one of the brothers out of the orphanage? Am I understanding you correct?
Yes, the mother had custody of the kids, but he was supposed to provide child support. He had a very good living as an electrician, and
Okay.
he made quite a bit of money, and he had a good job, but he just refused to pay the child support. And then went back to court a second time, as I recall, but he just didn't pay the child support. She said, I just can't support the kids. She was a seamstress. I think she finally got a job as a seamstress in a factory, but she couldn't support 3 kids on that salary. So she had them put in the orphanage, and eventually, Violet came back and the kids came back too. Yeah. Answer your question, Molly, okay?
Yeah, thank you
Okay.
so much.
Oh,
And
yes.
thank you for coming back to do this again, Jack.
Well, thank you both for having me, really.
I can't tell you how
It was a lot of
much.
fun.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about having you come back to do this for us like this since since Monday night, and knowing that we were able to put this together so quickly so that we could share this with our fellow baseball fans. I really appreciate you doing this, going out of your way to
I appreciate you guys.
All right, well, we're going to be coming back next week, Monday, October 20th, with my good friend David Benjamin Firstman and his presentation, Chris Davis, Mr. 247. Now, I saw this presentation at the National Convention in Dallas a few months ago. It's a lot of fun. Don't miss this. David's a great guy. You're going to want to see this. It's going to be a good time. The sign-up link is available in the chapter meeting booklet and at the SABR events calendar. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world, just like Jack Bales. For more information, go to SABR.org today. Jack Bales, you're extraordinary. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Thank you very much, Bruce and Molly, for having me.
So let's drop off. Let's go watch some playoff baseball.
Yes,
Jack,
indeed.
I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks to you both.
We'll see you next week.
I sure will be there. Bye-bye.
Bye now.